This year marks 9 years since Advocate Thuli Madonsela released the State of Capture report and 3 years since the State Capture Commission concluded its work. Despite R1 billion spent on this commission, there's been little tangible progress in prosecuting those implicated. This week, the Presidency released a progress report on the implementation of the Commission's recommendations. The report, also submitted to the National Assembly Speaker and NCOP Chairperson, claims that 48% of the 60 actions in the President's response plan are completed or nearly completed. Just over 20% are on track, while just 30% are delayed but receiving attention. We're now joined by Ariella Scher, who's the head of legal at Open Secrets. Ariella, good to have you on the program this evening. It's now 9 years since the State of Capture report and 3 years since the Zondo Commission concluded. From your legal perspective, what do you see as the single most critical failure in implementing the Commission's recommendations here?
Thanks so much for having me on. We'd absolutely agree with what you said, that there's just been little tangible response in relation to prosecuting individuals. From the Presidency's progress report, I think we need to assess it against its own aims. So what they say its aims are to restore the trust, the public's trust in state institutions, and also to prevent future state capture. And I think that it's clear that 3 years on, neither of those are near being achieved. What the report makes clear is that there have been quite some progress towards making structural reforms. So reforms that ensure that the system prevents a future commission of state capture. But it's also very clear to us that no individuals, definitely no individuals at the high level, are being held to account personally.
Given that R1 billion was spent on the Zondo Commission, what message does the lack of prosecution then send about accountability, for instance, and the rule of law in South Africa?
Well, that's exactly the point. We can't prevent future state capture if we're not addressing those who committed state capture in the first place. So if we look at the report, it says almost nothing about holding members of the executive to account who were involved at the time. And we know that state capture was a project that was enabled at the very highest levels of both the state and the private sector. So there's no accountability, and the report doesn't actually have transparency about what steps the Presidency is taking to hold those members of the executive to account. We don't know what they're doing or if they have any plans. So that's the first thing.
Let's remind ourselves here that the Commission also made strong recommendations, Ariella, on whistleblower protection. How would you describe the government's approach then to whistleblowers since then? And what legal reforms are most urgently needed in your view?
So as it stands, there haven't been substantive reforms to whistleblower legislation. There is, of course, a proposal that exists at the moment that comes from the NACAC, the President's National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council. But a big thing that's an issue there is that the NACAC submitted a report with its proposals to the Presidency in March of 2024, and the Presidency still has not made that report public. So we actually do not know what those proposals look like. And so, of course, the system that was in place during state capture that doesn't protect whistleblowers, it doesn't provide for any sort of financial or institutional support for whistleblowers. And so it leaves whistleblowers incredibly vulnerable. We know that the state capture whistleblowers have had a really, really tough time, and most of them haven't been able to recover personally, career-wise, financially, despite having, assumed such a huge responsibility in furtherance of protecting the state and the public.
With only 10 billion rand recovered out of an estimated 500 billion rand lost to state capture, do you believe the current asset recovery framework is fit for purpose? And if not, what alternatives might serve justice or better serve justice and restitution here?
So there are a lot of recommendations in the public domain around what asset recovery should look like. But I think we do need to recognize that in terms of implementing the Zondo Commission recommendations, that is one area where the state and the Asset Forfeiture Unit and the Special Investigating Unit, the SIU, have done particularly well, particularly when we compare what they've achieved to what other organizations have failed to achieve. So yes, there's been 10 billion rand recovered, That's been through both asset forfeiture, but also through penalties imposed, recovering monies that were spent by various private entities, by some management consulting firms. But those achievements, as I said, are in stark contrast to when we look at the amount or the failures in the realm of prosecutions of individuals, of holding them to account in terms of the criminal law.
A nasty surprise for some is that some individuals named in the Zondo report are now serving as MPs and overseeing state institutions currently. How does this then compromise efforts towards systematic reform and also public trust in parliamentary oversight?
Well, exactly. It just completely undermines public trust because the Zondo Commission, as you said, spent so many years and spent R1 billion in bringing this information into the public domain. And, you know, three years on from having received the last of the reports, there is no private accountability. There have been no successful prosecutions of people who committed state capture at a high level. And as a result, we have certain individuals who are deeply implicated sitting in parliament, but also carrying on with their life, you know, conducting business, possibly conducting business with the state, and just without a sense of accountability, there can be no undertaking that the rule of law has been served, and we're just undermining trust in public institutions.
Yeah. Ariella, we've seen delays and failures in high-profile prosecutions by the NPA. Do you think these failures reflect capacity issues, political interference even, or something deeper within the criminal justice system?
So what we'll say from our side as Open Secrets is that we're not sure. And as a result, we actually launched litigation in the past 2 months against both the Hawks and the NPA in relation to their failure to finalize the investigation and then decide whether to prosecute those implicated and named and investigated through the State Capture Commission, specifically in relation to some of the PRASA alleged corruption. We don't know what has caused the delay, but either way, in that particular instance, the delay is so unreasonable that we believe it's unlawful. So even if there are capacity issues, even if if within those criminal justice institutions, there's a lack of skill, of capacity to be able to interrogate and prosecute those important matters, this level of delay is just completely unjustifiable.
So the Zondo Commission, Ariella, also emphasized the role of Parliament in failing to prevent state capture. What legal or even constitutional mechanisms could improve parliamentary accountability, according to you?
So I'm not sure that there are additional mechanisms that we require, because the mechanisms that are contained in our current system, specifically in the Constitution, that require deep levels of oversight by Parliament over the executive, we believe that's sufficient, but we don't believe that Parliament is performing its role. So an example that I can give you is that there's the Civil Society Working Group on State Capture, which is a group of over 20 civil society organizations that has been monitoring both throughout the Zondo Commission, but also now the state's response to those recommendations. We wrote to the new Parliament already almost a year ago, towards the end of 2024. And we said to them, you know, it's now at that time, 2.5 years on, we note that all of these recommendations have not been fulfilled. Please can we engage with you, and please can you advise what this new Parliament, what its intentions are? And we haven't received a response. So Parliament is clearly not performing its oversight role, but it also doesn't seem to be willing to engage with civil society when we believe we have things to offer to assist it in performing that duty.
On the issue of money laundering and beneficial ownership, how do you assess the state's efforts to meet international transparency standards, especially after the grey listing warning?
So what we can say is that there are certain criminal offenses contained in our law that are relevant to money laundering that have never been prosecuted. So yes, we know that the state has made, as I said previously, a lot of the government has moved towards structural reform to improve the system, to allow for prosecutions of money laundering offenses. But we don't believe it's doing enough to actually prosecute those offenses. And so, of course, money laundering is so clearly related to the state capture crimes and to the system that enables corruption and the moving away of money that's supposed to be used for the public benefit. So what we understand is that South Africa is soon to be moved off the grey list, but what we can't see is really proper progress towards prosecuting those who are implicated in money laundering.
Ariella, civil society, including Open Secrets, continues to track and push for implementation. What has this monitoring revealed about the state's willingness or unwillingness to act on key recommendations here?
Well, again, I mean, it's everything that we've covered here, and that the Presidency report both outlines quite starkly, but also doesn't say, which is that when it comes to individual accountability, we're just not making enough progress. We cannot justify that it's taking so long to punish people who were involved at very high levels of stealing money from the state for their own benefit. What was the point of undertaking this whole process of the Zondo Commission if we're not going to put into place the correct maneuvers so that we prevent it happening again and we restore faith of the public in the state institutions?
As we wrap, what would you say to South Africans who feel fatigued or even hopeless about ever seeing justice for state capture? Or how can civil society then re-energize the public around these accountability efforts, if you will?
It feels exhausting that we have to keep doing this, but state capture didn't start in the early 2000s. State capture is the basis on which South Africa was formed way back when it was colonized. And we need to keep moving towards the kind of state that we want to live in which public monies are used for the benefit of the public and that we can all benefit from. And it requires a participatory democracy. Civil society can only do so much, but we need to all as individuals, as citizens, as residents of this country, need to keep pushing our public officials in every way that we can. There's lots of ways to get involved, whether individually or through civil society, but we can't let ourselves become exhausted because we've seen what can happen. And at the moment, we haven't done enough to prevent that happening again.
Head of Legal at Open Secrets, that's Ariella Scher. Thank you so much for your insights and the important work that her and others at Open Secrets continue to do in keeping the flame of accountability alive as the country reflects on the cost, the financial, institutional, and even social aspect of state capture. Conversations like this are vital in holding the powerful to account, but also ensuring that lessons of the Zondo Commission are not lost in history. We do appreciate her time and voice on this critical issue as well as we reflect on the State Capture Commission.